This is the Beyond Reason podcast.
Yes, you are listening to the latest Beyond Reason podcast with your host, Michael Yaffee. Of course, the voice of reason in a world that is beyond reason. You can catch any of the podcasts on my podcast stream. Anywhere podcasts are available, just search for the Beyond Reason Network. I have a lot of different stuff I want to talk about today. We have some trade news as the Trump administration met with the European Union Commissioner yesterday, and he's touting a win on trade. It's a little bit more complicated than Trump's making it out to be, of course, so we're going to get to that. Someone also vandalized the Trump Hollywood star. I want to talk about that. Pompeo said some good things yesterday that encouraged me. I want to talk about that. We also have the Cohen-Trump tapes released, and I have an opinion on that as well. So a lot of different stuff to get to today. It's going to be a longer than usual podcast, but you'll want to stay with me through the whole thing, which I know you will. You like intelligent conversation because this is Orlando's Smart Talk Radio. Before I get into the news of the day, though, if you were wondering why I did not have a podcast last week, it's because I went on vacation. I visited my brother in Nashville. My brother just moved to Nashville. He was living in Dallas. Now he lives in Nashville. He'd lived in Nashville before. I'd visited there like 8 years ago. So it's been a while since I've been there, but I went back. Had a really good time. I would encourage anyone to go to Hattie B's, the restaurant. If they're in Nashville, go to Hattie B's. You will have to wait in line, but their hot chicken, let's just say it's amazing. It was really, really good. Probably the best food I had all week. Definitely want to check that out. If you like spicy food like me, you know I like spicy food. So you definitely want to try their hot chicken. It's really good. I also visited Andrew Jackson's house and his tomb there, the Hermitage. I've read about it many times, read about Andrew Jackson a lot, and so it was nice to get some perspective on that. But it was a really good time with family and all that. But the reason why I wanted to bring that up, I know you don't really care about my personal life, which I understand, it's pretty boring. But the reason why I brought that up is I decided to do something a little different on my vacation. I don't always do this. I decided while I was there to not look at the news at all. That means not checking my phone, not going on the news websites, not listening to any news podcasts. I know I shouldn't be saying this because it's good for business for people to listen constantly to podcasts in the news. But I decided, and it was just 4 days, to not do it. Not do it at all. Not look at it in social media or anything. And you know, I have to say, even though someone in my line of business should not say this, but I'm going to say it anyway. I think this is something that everyone should do at least once or twice a year. To unplug from it all just for a few days. Go on vacation and don't look at it at all on your vacation. Because I think it really does give you perspective on the world. Because, I mean, the one thing I noticed is, for one, not everyone out there is so entrenched in all of this on a daily basis like listeners of this show or like I am. That there is a world, that there are lives out there that are not constantly involved in that world. And it's good to understand how other people in the country think, how other people in the country live. And it's, you know, not everyone's involved in that. Some people are more involved in the sports news world or something. The other thing I noticed is that, the main thing I noticed really, is that the country is doing pretty well. And the reason I bring that up is because when you're involved in the news of the day, especially national news and especially politics, it seems like every day there's some kind of new crisis. And every day there's some kind of news that we need to be outraged over. Trump said something and now we're all outraged, and we have to show our outrage to everyone on social media, and we have to have arguments, and we have to have mass protests, and everything has to be outrageous, and you have to go out and let everyone know what a crisis we're in. Has anyone else noticed that? It's just there's always some kind of new crisis that we all have to pay attention to, and that could lead us to the end of democracy or the end of America or the end of the economy. And it's always something new, especially these days. Every day, the news cycle is so fast. And that always includes people getting super involved, super upset, and yelling at each other on social media. And now that's bleeding over into everyday life. Or you have some mass protests, or you have some violence somewhere because of the news. And I realized that most of that is just for ratings, I think. Just for entertainment purposes. To gin up the next crisis so you keep watching it. Or you keep listening to it. And if you unplug from that for a while, you realize that a lot of that stuff really doesn't affect your daily life. And a lot of that stuff really doesn't affect the country. That we're still pretty much, in a lot of ways, a free country. Not as free as we used to be, maybe, in a lot of ways. But we're still a free country, and the country kind of keeps running on its own, and people just go about their daily lives on their own, and people work, or people start their own businesses. And people do their own thing, and the people take care of their family, and it runs just fine on its own. And when you're unplugged from the news entertainment world, you realize that it's really not that bad. You realize that things are pretty good. For the most part in our daily lives, things are peaceful. That there's no need really for all this outrage. There's no need really for this constant crisis mentality that seems to exist in everyone's minds. That most of that, a lot of that, is just noise. And I'm not saying you shouldn't pay attention to what's going on. Obviously, you should, because things do affect you. What the president does, with tariffs, which we're going to talk about, and trade, that affects the economy. And you have to vote. But I think we have to unplug a little bit sometimes from it to give ourselves some perspective, to realize that, yes, it's important to stay informed. Yes, it's important to know what's going on. But that doesn't mean that everything that happens in the White House or on Capitol Hill or in the media circles or on social media or whatever this next protest, that a lot of that is not worth all the outrage, and it's not a constant crisis. The country as a whole, and most people in this country, are not in crisis mode. They're just not. They're focused more on their own business, or their own families, or their own interests, or their own hobbies. And I think a lot of times people like me forget about that. We forget about the real world. We are so entrenched in this news entertainment world, and we think that is reality. And I think a lot of it isn't reality. I think a lot of it is just noise for attention and ratings and so forth. So it's something I should not say in my business because I want you to listen. But I think it's important. Take a vacation this summer. Unplug from it all for a while. Give yourself a break. Give yourself some perspective and realize that this country is not as much of a crisis as a lot of people like to portray. So I wanted to share that with you because it really hit me especially hard during my vacation. Okay, now we got to talk about the latest news. The biggest news of the week so far is the fact that it seems that Trump has sort of made a deal with the European Union. Now, there's a lot of specifics that are not involved, but he met with the EU's executive arm, or the European Commission, the chief of EU's executive arm, Jean-Claude Juncker, yesterday because he wanted to talk about a trade deal. And it seems like, I've talked a lot about Trump's trade policies and how I disagree with a lot of the rhetoric. But yesterday, Trump came out and said there was a victory. He's not going to implement more tariffs on the EU for now because he says they have come to an agreement. And you know what? This is what he said yesterday.
This will open markets for farmers and workers, increase investment, and lead to greater prosperity in both the United States and the European Union. It will also make trade fairer and more reciprocal. My favorite word, reciprocal.
Okay, and there we go. And that's what he said. But I want you to listen. I want you to listen to what Wilbur Ross said yesterday on Fox News, member of Trump administration. This is what he said about the deal with the EU.
I think today is a win both for the EU and for the United States, because our objective is zero tariffs, zero trade barriers, zero subsidies, zero restrictions on market access. We think the EU now is interested in the same direction.
And, when he says something like that, I have no problem with that. Trump has tweeted out recently that what he really wants, his real idea, is to get rid of all subsidies and all trade barriers and all tariffs on both sides when he makes these trade negotiations, and especially with the EU. Now, in a joint press conference yesterday, both leaders promised to work towards that, zero tariffs on non-auto industrial goods, and to reduce barriers on things like and increased trade on things like services, chemicals, pharmaceuticals, medical products, and soybeans. That's good. If that's his overall goal, that's, as a free trader, as someone who's against protectionism, I have no problem with that. I think that's great. Now, the biggest problem I have with all of this rhetoric, once again, and I've said it before, and I'm not the only one saying this, anyone who understands how trade actually works will say this, but it's when Trump says stuff like this. It's the rhetoric that bothers me. Trump tweeted out earlier this week, he says, "Every time I see a weak politician asking to stop trade talks or the use of tariffs to counter unfair tariffs, I wonder, what can they be thinking? Are we just going to continue and let our farmers and country get ripped off? Lost $817 billion on trade last year. No weakness." Now, when he says we lost $817 billion on trade last year, that really doesn't make any sense. What does he mean we lost $817 billion on trade last year? What does that mean? It means nothing. All it means is we have a trade deficit with them. Just because we have a trade deficit with a country doesn't mean we lost that money, because it's called a trade. Bud, who hosts the morning show, he does advertisements for Central Florida Lincoln. He wants you to buy a Lincoln. When you go out and you buy a Lincoln, you don't lose money to the Lincoln dealership. You made a trade. You give them money and you get something in return. When we have trade deficits, it's because we've given them money. American consumers, American manufacturers, businesses, they've given those companies over there money, and we've gotten products in return. That's a trade. We're not losing money. Now, you could argue we've lost a little bit because some of that does go to tariffs, which is basically a tax that goes to their governments, and I understand that point, but that's not what Trump's talking about here. What Trump is talking about is that because we have a trade deficit, that means we lost. That's not what it means. It's a trade. So when he says stuff like that, it's incredibly misleading. And that's why I'm always worried about his trade talks. Now, to get into, he says, they promise that they're going to buy more soybeans, which will help a lot of the farmers. Well, the EU, the commissioner there, the executive commissioner, he can promise all he wants to buy soybeans, but he has no power over that. It's up to the private companies over there, the private farmers, to buy the soybeans. The EU can't force them to buy the soybeans. This is my problem with so much of the trade talk, is so much of it is misunderstood. For one, when we're importing something, it's not like we're just importing products and selling it. A lot of times you have American manufacturers who import raw materials that they can't get here, and they use those raw materials to manufacture things and sell them here, and also export some of what they're making to other countries, back to other countries. One of the companies that really originally liked Trump's tariff policy because they wanted protection. They wanted special privilege. Remember, when Trump adds a tariff to something, he's adding a tax. And he's adding a tax to give special favors to certain industries. That's what protectionism is, to so-called protect certain industries from competition, which hurts the market. But one of the companies that wanted that was Whirlpool. So the company, the appliance company Whirlpool wanted some of that. They really liked Trump's trade policies, and so Trump added tariffs to washing machines of foreign companies. Well, Whirlpool doesn't like that policy anymore because what's happened is Trump has imposed tariffs on steel and aluminum and other things that we get from other countries. And guess what? Whirlpool imports a lot of their raw materials to make their washing machines and other appliances from other countries. So now they have to pay more for those raw materials to build their products that they want to sell. This is why protectionism is bad. This is why trade wars can be bad. So Whirlpool, which used to love Trump and thought it was going to really help their businesses and hired all these new employees because of it, are now hurting again because their raw materials cost more. These are the unintended consequences of trade wars, or this simplistic trade ideology that's out there, that because we have a trade deficit, that means we're losing. It doesn't mean we're losing. Here's my question. What if, and I'm all for this, that's what's interesting. A lot of times Trump is too simplistic with things and people just buy into it. But there's usually a grain of truth in some of the things he says, or a grain of good in some of the things he said. And some of the grain of truth is that, yes, some of these countries do charge too high tariffs on certain products. And the goal of getting rid of those tariffs and the goal of free trade is a good thing. So that is a grain of truth. But this idea that trade deficits are necessarily all bad and that we're losing money because we have a trade deficit is not true. But back to that grain of truth, I am all for lowering those trade barriers. But here's the thing. What if, let's say, we get that goal and we lower all the trade barriers and all the trade tariffs with the European Union? And what if in 2 years we look at the trade deficit again and we still have a trade deficit with the EU? What if that happens? Because that's entirely possible. Because a trade deficit isn't necessarily just because of tariffs or barriers. It could be that our economy is just doing better and that we want to spend more money than they do. Or it could be that on certain industries, they make better products than we do and we prefer to buy their products. Not just because of the tariff policy, or just because we like their products. Or let's say some kind of economic calamity happens in one of the big European countries. That could affect and that could increase a trade deficit. So you could theoretically get rid of all of the tariffs and still have a trade deficit with this country. Does that mean we're still losing billions of dollars to this other country? No, this is what I'm talking about. It's so much of this is completely misunderstood. There's a chance you could get rid of all the tariffs and still have trade deficits. We're still going to probably have trade deficits with China for a long time because the Chinese people don't have the money to buy our products as much as we have the money to buy theirs. So if we get rid of all the tariffs with them, it doesn't necessarily mean you're going to get rid of the trade deficit. This is something that Trump just doesn't seem to get, doesn't seem to understand. But the other thing I want to mention about this topic, and this is really, let's say you support Trump's tariffs, you support his trade policies, you want to get rid of the trade deficit and all that stuff. There is one thing that every conservative who believes in small government should be concerned about when it comes to Trump implementing these tariffs. The biggest thing that I'm concerned about is the fact that Trump is doing this by himself, without the power of Congress. Why have we given the president that much power? I don't think that's a good thing. This is really something that should be done through Congress, because basically it's a tax. And adding new taxes to something should be done through Congress. Now, part of that is because Congress has given away a lot of that power to the presidency. Some of the ways that a president can impose tariffs without congressional approval is one, through the Trading with the Enemy Act of 1917, the Trade Act of 1974, which allows the president to implement a 15% tariff for 150 days. There's the International Emergency Economic Powers Act of 1977, which would allow him to implement tariffs during a national emergency. Now, Trump's White House is using Section 232 of the Trade Expansion Act of 1962. It's a provision that gives the Secretary of Commerce the authority to investigate and determine the impacts of any import on the national security of the United States, and the president the power to adjust tariffs accordingly. These are all ways that the Congress has given up this power to the executive branch. Any conservative should not want this. Why would you want to give the president this much power? You might like that Trump is using that power now, but he's setting a precedent for future presidents to use that power for bad in the future. Just because it's Trump, this is why you limit the power of the presidency. You might like it when your president's doing it, but when a Democrat president gets in there, like Bernie Sanders, if he ever got in there, God forbid, what would he do with that kind of power? You really want the president to have that much power? Any conservative, even if you support Trump's trade policy, should be concerned about the fact that the president has that much power. I'm concerned about it as well. So I want to get into the next topic here. One of the things, a little critical of the Trump administration, although I believe in the overall goal of getting rid of trade barriers. So if in the end that's all that happens, the trade war ends, and we get rid of all trade barriers, and we get rid of all tariffs, then fine. Then fine. Maybe I was wrong and should be critical. I don't like the rhetoric, because I think the rhetoric is misleading. But one good thing that came out of the Trump administration this week came from Secretary of State Mike Pompeo yesterday when he spoke to the Senate, when he testified to Congress. Basically, one of the concerns I had before Russia met with Putin, or before Trump met with Russia, before Trump met with Putin, President Putin over there, and I talked about this when I hosted it for the morning show, is I was very concerned that Trump would accept Russia's annexation of Crimea, that he would authorize it and approve it, and say the United States now recognizes that annexation. Now, Trump never did that in that meeting, and I was gone right after that whole disaster when Trump had that press conference when he basically said he believed Putin and Russia over our intelligence community. He has since walked a lot of that back, and there's been a lot of controversy over that, and you've heard it all. But one thing he did not do is recognize the annexation of Crimea. Well, Secretary of State Mike Pompeo spoke to the Senate yesterday, and he actually gave some good news when it came to this. He made an announcement about that, and I totally support the Trump administration on this. This is what Mike Pompeo said.
On the subject of Russia, I want to bring something to your attention right off the bat today. Today, the Trump administration is releasing what we're calling the Crimea Declaration. I won't read the whole thing. I will submit it for the record. It's been publicly released as well. But one part reads as follows, quote, "The United States calls on Russia to respect the principles to which it has long claimed to adhere and to end its occupation of Crimea," end of quote. I want to assure this committee that the United States does not and will not recognize the Kremlin's purported annexation of Crimea. We stand together with allies, partners, and the international community in our commitment to Ukraine and its territorial integrity. There will be no relief of Crimea-related sanctions until Russia returns control of the Crimean Peninsula to Ukraine. This Crimea Declaration formalizes United States policy of non-recognition.
Okay, so that's good news, because there was some question about that, because Trump wouldn't directly answer the question when he was asked whether he would recognize that annexation. Well, it seems the Trump administration is taking a hard line on that, and that's good news. Even though I know that Putin will probably never give back Crimea to the Ukraine, to Ukraine. I understand that completely. But the fact is, you don't want to set a precedent to allow Putin to maybe go even further. That's the problem. It's not about what's happened now, but what could happen in the future if you recognize it. If you recognize it, that gives Putin a strong incentive to look at some other territory he might want to take. You have countries like Latvia and Estonia and other countries on the border there that are very concerned about what Russia could do next. And the world community needs to stand firm against this kind of annexation because Putin does not want to stop. And we can't give him an incentive to continue to try to expand his territory and try to expand his quote-unquote empire. Because that's what he wants to do, especially since his economy is not doing all that well. And a lot of times when these dictators want to, remain in control, and when their economy isn't doing as well, what they want to do is they want to expand. They want to expand military power, and they want to expand territory to make their people happy and to take away from their struggling economy. Well, now at least we're taking a hard line on that, and that was just some good news that came out of the Trump administration. So I definitely support Mike Pompeo on that. It was something I was concerned about. A lot of people were. They didn't really know what was going to happen with that meeting. But there you go. So the other piece of news that I wanted to get to, it's not too surprising, but it seems that President Trump's Hollywood Walk of Fame star has once again been vandalized. Yeah, some guy holding a pickaxe decided that he was going to basically try to destroy, and basically did destroy, actually, not just try, he basically destroyed Trump's star. And it's not the first time that this has been vandalized, but it happened again this week. It says officers were called around 3:30 a.m. to the star's location at Hollywood Boulevard near Highland Avenue, where they found a small piece of rubble in place of the star that Trump received in January 2007 for his role in the NBC show The Apprentice. The star-smashing suspect, who reported the crime to police, later turned himself in to Beverly Hills police after leaving the pickaxe at the scene, according to the Los Angeles Police Department. He called police and said, "See you soon." And so he basically admitted it. His suspect is identified as Austin Clay, 24 years old, who was booked on suspicion of felony vandalism. So the reason why I wanted to bring this up is, this is the latest example of what some are calling Trump derangement syndrome. But you've had different incidents with the Trump administration. This is an incident of vandalism. You've had violent protests in the past. You've had these protests of Trump administration officials at their home, at their restaurants, where they're chased out of restaurants. And it continues to be growing and concerning. It's something I've talked about on this podcast before. But you might want to ask, what could drive someone to be so upset at our president to commit a felony and be arrested for it and think that this is a badge of honor, to think that this is a good thing? What would drive someone to be like that? Even if you don't like Trump, why would you want to go to jail for it, to commit this kind of vandalism? Well, I want to actually point to something that the senator from New Jersey, Democrat Senator Cory Booker, said. Earlier this week, he was talking at a press conference in Washington, D.C. Elizabeth Warren and other senators were standing right by him. And he was talking about Trump's pick for the Supreme Court, Brett Kavanaugh. And what he said kind of raised some suspicions with a lot of people. And I'm going to relate this to the vandalism at Trump's Hollywood star in a sec, but this is what he said.
In a moral moment, there is no neutral. In a moral moment, there is no bystanders. You are either complicit in the evil, you are either contributing to the wrong, or you are fighting against it. And so I am calling on everyone right now who understands what's at stake, who understands who Kavanaugh is.
So he was talking about Brett Kavanaugh, and he was basically saying, if you're not opposing him or you support Kavanaugh, you are complicit in the evil or the moral wrong. Because you support a very qualified Supreme Court candidate? who might have some opinions that disagree with yours, but he's still a good person, very qualified? This is what I mean. This is why you wonder why people have these mass protests where they interrupt Trump officials at a restaurant or something. Or you have Antifa that goes violent in some of their protests. Or you had people vandalizing the Trump star or whatever it is. It's because you have people on the left, on the Democrat side, you have the rhetoric is so heated that you are calling the other side evil. Well, you constantly hear stuff like that Trump is evil, that the other side is evil, that he's a Nazi. I think there was an interview with that new socialist from New York where they were both saying what he did on the border is almost like ethnic cleansing. If you actually believe in that kind of rhetoric where the other side is evil, of course you're going to vandalize a star and who cares to get arrested for it? You are fighting against evil. And when you're fighting against evil, any means necessary to destroy it in a lot of cases. So it's not surprising to me that someone would vandalize Trump's Hollywood star at the walk, at the Walk of Fame, because they believe it's evil. They don't just disagree with the right. They don't just disagree with Trump. They believe he is evil and should be stopped any means necessary, any protest, even if that protest is vandalism, even if that protest is a felony. They think it's a badge of honor. They think it's a good thing because they have been told over and over again, and they believe it, that Trump is literally evil. And that's why a lot of this heated rhetoric that I've been talking about for weeks, if not months on this show, really bothers me. It continues, but it bothers me. I don't like it on either side. Because this is what happens when you start calling each other the worst of names, when you start literally calling someone evil or the enemy. I criticized Trump when he said the media is the enemy of the American people. When you start having that kind of rhetoric on both sides, you are going to lead to things like vandalism and violence. Because you start to really believe it, and instead of just saying, oh, let's agree to disagree, that evil has to be stopped. If you don't stop it, well, you're complicit in it. It's a big problem. And I think it's not good for the future of this country. And that's why I continue to talk about that kind of stuff on this show. So if we're talking about morality, we're talking about the moral argument here. One thing that came out this week, one piece of news came out, on yesterday, actually 2 days ago, was the fact that Trump's former attorney, Michael Cohen, who was arrested in a raid connected to the Mueller probe, even though they gave that information to the local cops there and they raided his office and so forth. They're trying to charge him. Well, Michael Cohen and his attorney released audio tape of a conversation between Cohen and Trump. And they were basically talking about paying off or buying a story, from the National Enquirer, or paying off. So a story about him having an affair with a former Playboy model would not get out. And there was some question on whether it was through cash and he was like, no, the lawyer said it was going to start a corporation and pay for it that way. And there was a lot of controversy on whether this is really damaging to Trump. Was there anything illegal in this? Now, I have a cut here from Alan Dershowitz, who was on Fox News, who kind of gives a take on this, and I think I have to agree with him for the most part. This is what he said.
There's no crime. This was a conversation between a lawyer and a client that should never have been heard, even if, and the tape is unclear, Trump raised the word cash. There was then a discussion, and the lawyer said, no, and President Trump said, no, we'll do it by check. Lawyers and clients have those conversations all the time. I've had conversations like that with clients. The end result is cash was not used, no payments were made. The context of the tape all suggests that the president wanted it to be papered. They wanted it to be a corporation, not just a payment. He wanted to make sure it was done right. He wanted to make sure it was done with records. And so I think the big picture is no crime. It sounds like Cohen is not as loyal to the president as he once was.
So that's Alan Dershowitz, and I think he's basically right. I don't think they're going to find anything illegal in this tape. I don't think it's going to really even hurt Trump that much. And the main reason why it's not going to hurt Trump, other than the fact that there was no crime in it, there was no there, is because, one thing that they wanted to put this out there is basically Trump is admitting here that he had an affair. Didn't really admit it, but Trump had said before he knew nothing about any of this, any payments to cover up anything. Trump said he knew nothing about it. And basically this is proof that he did know about it. So Trump was lying. But another reason they put this out is because, once again, it's an attack on Trump's character, because this is a man who had an affair and who was basically sleeping around. Now, why will this not hurt his support with the Trump supporters and with a lot of people, basically? Because most people knew this about Trump already. They knew this about Trump for years. Trump was on Howard Stern for years bragging about stuff like this. They knew this. The reason why a lot of these people voted for Trump to be president is because they had other priorities in mind. He was a fighter. He wasn't bought. He was an outsider. And we can't let Hillary Clinton get in there. So they reprioritized and kind of said, yeah, he had all these personal problems, but we still need him in the presidency. Yes, he has a character issues, but we still need him in there. So this is not anything new. This is not too shocking to anyone out there. That's why it's kind of was a story for a day and it's pretty much going away. Now, there are more tapes out there, and maybe something will come up in the future tapes. Who knows? I'm a little suspicious that it will, because why are they waiting so long? Some people are saying, well, they're going to wait right before the election. We'll see. I'm not sure. But, I started thinking about this. And the thing that came to my mind is, I believe that we kind of say, well, he has these character problems, but so what? That's his personal life. And I started asking myself, is this really where we should be as a country? And this is coming from someone who voted for Trump. I voted for President Trump. But I'm asking the question, should we not care about a president's morality? Should we not care about his character? Are we really in a good place in this country where we basically ignore those things? And when did this start? I'm not sure when it started, because, we had it with Bill Clinton. The Democrats did this with Bill Clinton. So this is something that's gone on both sides, where the country has basically just said, oh, we don't really care if you're a womanizer, as long as you pass policies I like, or as long as you're a Republican, or as long as you're a Democrat, then I don't really care. And, it even goes back to JFK. A lot of people at the time knew JFK was a womanizer, but they ignored it because they liked him and they liked what he was doing for the country. But I was asking myself, and I don't know if I have a firm answer for this. My gut says we should care. That even though I voted for Trump because I did not vote for him in the primary, this was a big reason why, because of his character. But even if we like a lot of what Trump's doing, which I like a lot of what Trump is doing, it surprised me. There's a part of me that thinks, this is not setting a good example for the future of this country, where we're basically ignoring the character of the people we're putting in office. And before you could say, well, I didn't know. But this is an instance where we all know. We all know who Trump really is. We all know about Trump's past. We all know about his character and his problems with women and his problems with foul language and other dirty stuff he has done in the past. And yet we are willing to look past that because of our selfish reasons, I guess, or because he's on our team. That seems to be a big reason. And I keep asking myself, I don't think this is good for the future of the country. I think we should care about the character on either side. Democrats should care about character of Democrats. Republicans should care about the character of Republicans. Now, it was usually Republicans who cared about this stuff more, and now we don't care. It seems that the Republicans don't care either. And I've talked about this before, because we're losing the moral high ground. We can no longer argue from the moral high ground, which is another reason why I think a lot of this rhetoric has been heated. We just want to bash each other with a hammer, basically, either on social media or through arguments, because we can no longer argue from a moral high ground. So if you can't argue from the moral high ground on a lot of these things, then you're just going to try to win an argument by any means necessary. And we might think it's okay now, but when I look to the future of this, I don't know. It kind of bothers me. It kind of bothers me that as a country, we don't care that we voted in a president who not only had multiple affairs in the past and has done many other bad things in the past, but that he continues to lie about it. And we all know it and don't care. That kind of bothers me. I'm not sure it's good for the future of this country. And this is someone who I voted for Trump. So maybe I'm kind of a hypocrite on this. Because I voted for Trump because I didn't want Hillary to get in. And he was the best option of the people available, I thought. But it does bother me that so much of the Republican Party, even in the primary, really were willing to look past all that stuff. And maybe it's because our country doesn't care about this stuff as much. In our own daily lives, we don't seem to care as much about people sleeping around or having affairs or calling each other the worst of names like Trump did in the campaign trail. We do this in our daily lives. Why do we care if the president does it? I think it's a reflection of how a lot of our morality has taken a downturn in this country. And it bothers me. I was thinking about that this week. It's like, man, we don't even care that this guy has had multiple affairs, sleeping around, lies about it, pays people off to cover it up. And we don't care. We know about it. We knew about it, and we don't care. I don't know. Something to think about this week, something to chew on this week, because I think it should bother us, but it doesn't. Because we have other priorities. We want our team to win. We want to make America great again, and so forth. I don't know. I think it's going to come back to bite us in the future. All right, that is the show for you today. I appreciate you listening to the Beyond Reason podcast. If you want to follow me on Twitter, you can at Beyond Reason R. Check out all of my podcasts that I post on the Beyond Reason Network podcast stream on Spreaker, iTunes, and the rest. And I appreciate you joining me, and I'll catch you guys next time.